hopefully we'll be peaceful here. But, of course, this is the place where things are not always peaceful, is it? This is the place where all too often quiet serenity is disrupted by noise-making imbeciles on all sides of any particular offense. Like that person that just drove by with their car, and the only reason it's making that noise is because they haven't bothered to fix it in a long time. Right? They're not street racers or trying to flex their whatever, driving around like in a little Hyundai kind of, hatchback, and they just can't be bothered to get their car fixed. They have the means to. That is not a question. They don't care. They'd rather just make everyone else's life noisy and miserable and have their stupid exhaust blast a bunch of noises from time to time. And it's really silly. That's the way they are. Why do I mention that? Because it's part and parcel of living in a place where you have all kinds of idiocy, frankly, in the world. All kinds of stupid behavior. People who, frankly, hope for bad things too often. And yes, I'm talking about the people who are, quote, praying for war. Okay? Because they read some quote in the Bible. And sometimes you gotta pray for war. And sometimes you gotta pray for peace and all this other nonsense. Okay? Taking your orders from a book that's thousands of years old to pray for war is mental. Okay? The only reason that those things exist is to console those who are in the middle of one, so that they have strength psychologically. That is the point. It is not to actually hope such a cataclysmic, terrible conflict should arise in a place in any place, let alone in one that has just constantly been a place of conflict for thousands of years. And I can already hear, in certain distances, certain things. Maybe you can't hear them on the live stream, but I can sure hear things popping in the distance, and the wash of jet engines flying high overhead, going this way and that, in kind of all directions. I doubt that it's coming through on the mic, but there's quite a bit of it before. Now it's died down a little. People who are living in conflict zones and war zones, actual people living through it, are rarely, if ever, hoping, praying for actual war, unless there's something really wrong with them. And it's not always their fault, even if there is something really wrong with them. Right? They might be scarred from some terrible event or a series of events, trauma from loss. Right? They might be raging with anger for something terrible that happened to them or their loved ones, or both. They might just be impassioned about the situation because they're living through it. There's any number of reasons. Those are just a few of the very basic ones. Why, in fact, people can kind of lose their minds living through war. And if you're wondering, what's it like? I can tell you, there is a tense quiet. People are walking around far less than normal. People are kind of expecting Iran to either attack directly by sending more rockets and drones, some 1,800 kilometers or so, or 1,400, whatever, however far it is they send them from inside of Iran to attack Israel, and or expecting more attacks from their proxies in Lebanon and in Gaza. And I can tell you, there is no great joy in living through a war. There's nothing glorious about it. Those of us who are reasonable, and I'm sure it's on all sides, just want the violence to end. Just want the war to end. So we can go on about our lives. Not having to worry every second of every day. And even if it's just a thought in the back of our mind, because we're so inured to it. We're almost like numb or jaded, desensitized to the concept, even though we're literally living through it 24 hours a day, and it can come at any time. And there are times like now when the tension is almost palpable. And you can literally sense that somebody's going to do something stupid. Just as has happened many times in the past. I will say this, okay? The events of recent days, which have put the entire Middle East on a kind of a very tense footing, walking on eggshells, is a result of what's been going on since October 7th. And it's just patently absurd to suggest that if Israel had done this or that or the other thing in response, that anyone would have been okay with it. History shows it doesn't matter what Israel does. The world at large is going to condemn Israel, whether it's defending itself or proactively taking out its enemies that have attacked it and caused many Israelis to be murdered and other people as well. And you can tell me Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. Listen, I'm not going to condone the killing of innocent people. I don't care what tribe or nation or culture, or race or ethnicity or gender or anything they belong to. I deplore all forms of violence, especially killing. It is abhorrent. It is absolutely the worst thing. And yet people keep doing it to people. But a nation that is attacked and by an enemy who is sworn to its destruction doesn't really have much of a choice after a while. And there are certain moments in history when you have to respond with overwhelming force to put an end to that kind of nonsense. But unfortunately, we're dealing with an enemy in Gaza and in Lebanon and in Iran that is ideologically driven. They are interested only, in case you're wondering, there's some people barbecuing. I guess they're trying to take their minds off of the tension. They're listening to some music as they barbecue. And people that are driven by ideology are very typically not exactly in the mindset to be reasonable when they're driven by taking their orders from some supposed God. And that's unfortunate because it ends up costing blood and treasure from all parties involved. Most importantly, blood. Treasure we can replace. Blood is another matter. We can't replace people. And it's not the people at the ground level, as much as we like to be impassioned about our feelings or express ourselves or live stream about it on YouTube, right? To express other thoughts. It's not those people who are ultimately making the decisions of when and where to do something like start a war, launch a massive attack, launch a counterattack, send hit squads to other countries or bomb other countries or prepare for defense of a country. All these things that interfere with the day-to-day lives of everyday average people were all decided by people who are frankly the most protected from all of it, the most isolated and insulated from it. And they have the least risk in it. And you can tell me, well, we're talking about public officials get attacked all the time. Just look what happened in America. To which I say, what happened in America 2 weeks ago, as awful as it was, as deplorable and condemnable as it was, is not an average everyday event. It is an event that happens rarely in terms of actually harming a political leader of such high profile. The last one to get hurt was President Reagan in 1981. And yes, there have been several people who have attempted to do things at the White House since then, and some guy threw a shoe at Bush when he was in Iraq once. Some other guy tried to throw a grenade at him when he was speaking, I think in Georgia, in Tbilisi, Georgia. Some people try to shoot bullets at the White House or run through the lawn. One guy ran through the lawn. He got into the White House, where he was eventually tackled in the East Room. But those are rare events. That's why they make the news. They're unusual. It's the people in the positions of power, usually old men, but not always, who send the young men and women to fight and die. And that is frankly atrocious and unacceptable. Now, I'm not advocating for political violence that makes our leaders fight it out mano a mano, because that's a ridiculous way to settle a legitimate conflict between people and societies. But I am suggesting that those who do send young men and women to fight and die have to be held to account for their actions, whether they were good or bad. They have to be held to account. There has to be accountability. They have to be held to a higher standard, because they're sending people to fight and die for their cause, for their interests, right? For their political or financial gain, or both, or their gain of power. And they don't really care about the people at the bottom who have to do all the heavy lifting and all the fighting and all the hard things that come with dealing with a war as a person in the military or law enforcement or even civilians. And by the way, it's civilians who bear the brunt of it. It's not law enforcement, and it's usually not even the military, although the military certainly does pay a heavy price. For example, in Gaza, where hundreds of Israeli soldiers have perished since October 7th, right? More than a few hundred. And obviously, who knows how many people in Hamas have perished? Thousands and thousands, obviously. But even those lowly, low-ranking, rank-and-file Hamas members and Hezbollah members, they're just doing the bidding of their commanders. If their commanders told them to stop fighting, they'd stop fighting. If their commanders told them that's it, it's over, it would be over. Just like in Israel, right? If the commanders or the top politicians say it's over, it will be over. But the problem is the war in Israel and Gaza, and Israel and Lebanon, and the remote long-distance war between Israel and Iran is not up to Israel to end, really. And I know some of you will say that it is, and you can fantasize all you want. But the fact is, it's just not, right? If Israel was to stop fighting the war right now, and was just to pull back from Gaza and stop retaliating for every Hezbollah strike, what do you think would happen? Tell me, really, what do you think would happen? Do you think even after a few days of revenge bombings or whatever, rage and revenge, all these tired cliches and slogans that the angry people of Araby tend to say, You think even after a few days of that, they would just say, oh, okay, so you're admitting that you can't beat us, and so we're just going to call it off? Is that what you think would really happen? You think if Israel stopped defending itself, people who attack Israel would just suddenly stop attacking Israel? Do you really think that? Because I can tell you, Israel's been a country now for 76 years. And since before it was a country, people living in the same land were under regular attack from their not so pleasant neighbors. There were riots and there were pogroms and there were mass slaughters in a whole large, very large number of cities, towns, and villages. And you can say, oh, Deir Yassin. Yeah, Deir Yassin was horrible. Okay? Doesn't matter if it was 50 people, 150 people, 500 people, whatever it was. The number of people killed. It was horrible. Any number of citizens or innocent people, I don't care if they're military or not, if they're not in the middle of a fight, they're just being targeted by terror. It's wrong. What happened in Deir Yassin was wrong. Okay? And plenty of people in Israel have said so. But whether it was as bad as some people say or not, you can debate that all you want. It was still wrong for any civilian to be targeted. But therefore, it's equally wrong by many, 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 many times when groups like the Hamas intentionally target civilians. Not by accident, intentionally. Right? There is a saying, which was recently repeated by the Prime Minister of Israel, that for us, every death is a tragedy. Even if it's people that we're fighting in a war. It's still a tragedy because it's still a life. And we'd rather not kill somebody. If anything, we'd rather that the people we're fighting would put up their arms and surrender and not have to kill people. But obviously I don't agree with killing civilians. But that doesn't mean it's avoidable all the time either, in terms of targeted attacks. Does that excuse it? It's not an excuse for it. But it sometimes does happen, even when you have highly targeted attacks. And you can tell me, well, if Israel could blow up a bomb specifically, I saw some people saying, oh, Israel flew a bomb into the room of Hania, and if they could do that, why do they have to blow up all of Gaza if they could be so pinpoint accurate? First of all, they didn't fly a bomb into his room. It was planted there purportedly months ago, and there was some operative there who, when he or she knew that he was in that room, asleep, and his bodyguard there as well, it was set off, and he probably didn't even know it, because it just happened with immense power in one blast. So he died in his sleep. Which again goes back to what I said before about even the most, the guy gets called a moderate by the press. He was no moderate. If you just look at what he said, right? Every drop of blood that was spilled, he wanted more blood to be spilled to ignite a fire in the hearts of the people, the Palestinians, to fight more and rebel more and resist more and basically do more acts of terror. Okay, calling it resistance doesn't make it not terror. When you use violence, and specifically violence intended to kill people who have nothing to do with the fight, innocent civilians, and you target them on purpose, then as opposed to our Western beliefs where every death is a tragedy, in the case of the people like the Hamas or the Hezbollah, every death is a strategy. Right? They intentionally target innocent people who are mostly defenseless. They intentionally attack places that have little or no defense against them. Oh, but Israel has the Iron Dome. Yeah, Israel has the Iron Dome. The Iron Dome doesn't stop 100% of everything. Right? There's statistics and probabilities. If you have 1,000 projectiles coming at you at the same time, there's a lot of probability to indicate at least one of those things is going to get through, and probably more. When Iran bombed Israel a few months ago, it's not as if nothing got through. Right? One bomb was blown up over Israel, and the shrapnel fell and killed a 12-year-old girl. Her family is devastated from that. Their little girl was taken from them forever. Just like that. A piece of falling shrapnel. And I know there's people in Gaza suffering by the tens of thousands. And I know there's 1.5 million people displaced. And it's heart-wrenching stuff. And I said at the very outset of this stupid war, yet another stupid war in the Middle East, I said it's not going to end the way people think. And I said Netanyahu is to blame in many ways. He's not the one who launched the attack, but he was responsible for not making sure Israel was well defended against it. And he knew that such an attack was coming, and he ignored it at his own peril and at the peril of the lives of people who would ultimately pay the price. And to justify that, well, I'm sorry, but I can't. I can't. It's not right. That guy has to leave office. And we don't have to wait for the war to end. Okay? I don't have to hate him to think that. I can be a reasonable person who understands this guy does not want to leave office because he knows what happens if he does. And he doesn't want the war to end because he knows he'll leave office when the war ends, because he'll be booted from office. Because unlike in the United States, in Israel, you can have elections more often than that if there are things like votes of no confidence, which is a parliamentary rule that allows the parliament to say, hey, we've had enough of this, we want new leadership. Now you may say, well, that's not as graceful a way to govern as in the United States. Well, when you live in a country that's constantly in a state of conflict with your neighbors, you need more nimble and more agile leadership to make decisions and change course if necessary. When your literal existence is at stake, you can't just say, oh, we're going to have an election every 4 years no matter what. That's not a thing when your country is constantly in a state of war. In your own house, not in some foreign country. So anyway, hopefully things will stay calm. And over the coming days, we'll see that things are indeed going to remain that way. But for now, it's tense and you can feel it practically everywhere you go. I'm now in a place that's usually packed with hundreds, if not thousands of people at this time of day. But right now, it's basically less than 50 people in this area. Anyway, hope you all stay safe. Take care.